Historians of Reddit. What's a devastating event that no one talks about? Leprosy colonies of Hawaii. People who were diagnosed with leprosy were forcibly banished to Kalaupapa to live out the rest of their lives. They were dug graves, had to stand in them, while their families and friends basically had a living funeral for them where they had the dirt thrown on them. They were then pronounced dead to the world and no longer part of the community. This continued through 1969, even after Hawaii officially became a state. Galveston, Texas was once considered to be one of the most important commercial ports in the United States and was referred to by several fantastical names such as the Queen City of the Gulf, and the Wall Street of the West. All that changed when it suffered a near-direct hit from a devastating Category 4 hurricane in 1900. The deadliest natural disaster in American history. Pretty much the entire city was destroyed by a storm surge and anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 people died. Galveston was rebuilt, but it never truly regained its status. Houston became the state's commercial center in the storm's wake. The Highland clearances. Over a period of about 150 years between the 18th and 19th centuries, English and lowland Scottish landlords evicted thousands upon thousands of Highland Scots from their ancestral homelands and replaced them with sheep. It's hard to classify as a historical event because it went on for so long and is usually interpreted as an ambiguous series of largely isolated incidents. There were attacks on villages in which the landlords would burn their tenants' houses to the ground to get them to leave, and burned their land so that nothing could grow. Multiple people were caught in the fires and died. During the Glencoe massacre, 30 members of Clan MacDonald were murdered by Scottish government forces for supporting the Jacobite uprising. The Irish potato famine also affected the Highland Scots who grew potatoes, and many people starved or were forced to leave as well. As a result, there was a series of mass migration in which Scots traveled to Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the US, and largely lost their language and culture. It's very sad, and all that is basically why Highland culture and language has largely been lost. In 535, humans went through hell. Many reported a strange color in the skies. Not just in Europe. A dense, dry fog was also reported in Asia and the Middle East. Even the regions now known as the Americas weren't spared, e.g. drought in Peru. Temperatures were rather low in some places. It snowed either in the summertime. One survivor, a Roman politician named Cassiodorus, explained about the bluish sun and no shadows being cast, even in the noon. It has been hypothesized that Iceland holds the reason for the events between the years 535 and 536. Iceland is known for its volcanoes, and it was possible one such was to blame. The Bronze Age collapse. Arguably more devastating than the fall of the West Roman Empire. So much knowledge lost, truly one of history's great mysteries. I recommend reading up on it. It's really interesting. The sinking of the MV Wilhelm Gustloff in 1945 was the most deadly civilian shipwreck in history. It was a passenger ship mostly carrying Polish, Lithuanian and Estonian World War II refugees. It was torpedoed by a Soviet submarine. At least 9,400 people died. Some estimates go up to 11,000. It's absolutely criminal that the Titanic gets so much more attention. Although it was awful, obviously, when the Gustloff sinking killed nearly 10 times as many people. There's a spectacular historical fiction novel about it by Ruta Sepetys called Salt to the Sea. Highly recommend. It's very humanizing. There's so many, but I would go with That will probably be mentioned in other comments. But I think any stories about workers in the early 1900s are pretty horrible. Radium Girls is a pretty horrible event. For example, after being told that the paint was harmless, the women in each facility ingested deadly amounts of radium after being instructed to point their brushes on their lips in order to give them a fine tip. Some also painted their fingernails, face and teeth with the glowing substance. The women were instructed to point their brushes in this way because using rags or a water rinse caused them to use more time and material, as the rinse was made from powdered radium, gum arabic and water. Many women died and became sick with horrendous diseases. One woman named Molly Maggie had her jawbone crumble. You can read about that here. By May, her dentist thought Molly needed surgery to remove a fast-growing abscess he'd found on her jaw. When he got the gums open, the bone didn't look right as it was too ashy and gray. So he gently prodded it with his finger. To his shock and horror, the whole bone crumbled under his fingertip like ashes in a fireplace. Instead of removing a tumor, he wound up digging Molly's entire left jaw out with nothing but his fingers. Unbeknownst to him, the radium had perforated the bone cells and stripped them of calcium. It had, like a little machine gun, shredded the collagen inside the bone and left it as little more than a pile of splinters. There's also a great book on this called The Radium Girls: The Dark Story of America's Shining Women, by Kate Moore. This whole story is extremely depressing. Work in the 1800s and early 1900s was pretty horrible for a lot of women, men and children, brew wenches, female miners in the 19th century. You can look that up. Children in chimney sweeps, etc. One thing that doesn't get talked about was more of a phenomenon or major problem than event. And that was how many people died in theater fires due to poor design, combustible materials, few fire exits, and panic. One of the worst was the Iroquois Theater in Chicago, 1903, which is both the deadliest theater fire and the deadliest single building fire in U.S. history, where patrons died after a sparks from an arc light set a curtain on fire. Then a chain reaction started, exacerbated by failures of the things in place that were supposed to combat fire. The theater had been overbooked to compensate for earlier poor sales, causing some to sit blocking the exits. The fire was immediately worsened when performers opened the stage door to get outside, as it turned the fire into a fireball. Many people were held inside by iron gates that had been put in place to prevent people from sneaking in without paying. As people fled, they tumbled downstairs, trampled each other, got squashed to death. Their unfamiliarity with the building got them stuck in dead ends and up against windows. Many jumped from fire escapes and died, while those behind them were saved, the bodies of the earlier jumpers cushioning their falls. All in all, 602 people died. Many were children. The story is a lot more complicated and sordid with city corruption, etc. The one takeaway is the incident promoted the development and use of the panic bar. Ad. Sorry this is so poorly written. I was trying to write it really fast and my phone. Mother and baby homes in Ireland. The Mayan Society and the lost scriptures that we still haven't found on top of the scriptures we still can't seem to decipher. The blinding of 15,000 soldiers. The Bulgarians and Byzantines would clash every couple of years, and after one battle the Byzantine leader just snapped and cut out the eyes of the soldiers that surrendered, then sent them back home. The Bulgarian leader died upon hearing the news. Asked my history studying friend about this. She said there's a lot of events that people don't talk about. For example, there was a lot of countries involved in the Balkan conflict who knew about the massacre of Srebrenica but still allowed it to happen. So many historical events are just so grim and depressing when you read about it. We knew bad things were happening but didn't stop until it was too late for many people. China during WW2. The Japanese absolutely decimated the areas they occupied during the war. Not just through rape and murder but through biological warfare that resulted in the slow death of hundreds of thousands of people, largely forgotten by history. I'm not in any way a supporter of the current Chinese government. But I feel like where they're at is a response not only to communist government tyranny of the Moa era, but to the horrific Japanese atrocities that allowed it to happen in the first place. The disease outbreaks that hit the Americas with the arrival of the Europeans. You hear about a 90% death rate and it sounds made up. But whatever the actual number was, entire civilizations were literally wiped out. Cultures that had existed for thousands of years are just gone, with barely a record left. You have stories of people coming across whole villages of corpses. These people died never even having seen the Europeans, never knowing what was killing them and their loved ones, and totally helpless to do anything about it. The Halifax explosion, and with it many other smaller catastrophes that we gloss over in the name of progress or war. I'd probably say the harrying of the North. It happened after William the Conqueror invaded England and defeated King Harold at Hastings. Many people in the country, especially the North, did not want a foreigner to be king, and William responded ruthlessly. I think I heard in a documentary once that the percentage of people killed was 1% of the entire world population at the time. Holodomor. I didn't even learn about this until college, but Stalin intentionally starved 6 million Ukrainians to death. He did plenty of awful stuff, but this one seems to be glossed over despite the scale and genocidal aspects of it. Bronze Age collapse is the biggest one. Treblinka gets overshadowed by Auschwitz a lot, and the actual detailed description of the devastation of the American Indian Wars. Also not a historian, but learning about the Beslan school siege in Russia was heartbreaking. As kids were settling down for the first day of the class, the school was attacked by Chechen terrorists. I think over 300 people, half of whom were kids, died over the course of 3 days. Cambodian genocide. They killed so many kids that the life expectancy was 18.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.